It's time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. The Verdict is sponsored in part by the Able Law Firm. It's time for The Verdict.
And welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett, and I am joined as always by one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. Kent, what do we have today?
Well, for today and for a couple of other shows in the future, we're getting back to our roots, if you will. The show's called The Verdict. It originally started out covering principally legal subjects. We sometimes go afield on other interesting topics, but we're getting back to our roots. And we're going to focus today on the highest court in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Who makes up that court? What do they do? We're honored to have the Chief Justice of the Oklahoma Supreme Court, the Honorable Joe Watt, with us. It will be the first, as I say, in a series of shows on Oklahoma appellate courts. We'll start out with the Supreme Court, have another show in the future on the Court of Criminal Appeals, and after that, the Oklahoma Court of Civil Appeals. And I think it will be informative for our viewers about what our appellate courts do and how they relate to each other.
A lot to learn. This morning, the Chief Justice of the Oklahoma Supreme Court, Joseph M. Watt. It's next on The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers is going to introduce our guest.
We are really pleased today to have the Honorable Joe Watt, the Chief Justice of the Oklahoma Supreme Court, with us. Justice Watt is obtained his undergraduate degree from Texas Tech University, his law degree from the University of Texas. While he was at the University of Texas, he was named the outstanding law student in the nation. He then went into private practice for approximately 14 years in southwest Oklahoma, principally in the Altus area. He served on the bench in Altus or Jackson County for 6 years, was appointed to the Oklahoma Supreme Court in 1992, has been retained in 3 elections where he stood on the retention ballot, and he's married to Kathy and has 4 children.
Correct.
And we're really pleased to have you on The Verdict, Justice Watt.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a joy to be with both of you this morning.
Thank you.
You know, it sounds like by the title, the Supreme Court is the highest court in the state of Oklahoma. What are the duties? What sort of cases do you hear?
That's correct. The Supreme Court in Oklahoma, under our Constitution, is the highest court in the state. Under Article 7, Section 4, we have superintending control over all inferior courts throughout the state of Oklahoma. So we're charged with the responsibility of running basically the third branch of government.
Would that include municipal and county?
No, just the state district courts in all of the 77 counties, the Court of Civil Appeals, and of course the Court of Criminal Appeals that sits at the Capitol.
Okay, so what sort of cases come to you?
Basically, we deal only with civil cases. The Oklahoma Supreme Court is the court of last resort for civil cases. Texas and Oklahoma are unique in that regard, in that we have a separate court of last resort for criminal cases, being the Court of Criminal Appeals, which also sits at the Capitol, and that is a 5-member court. So we basically hear no criminal cases, just civil appeals.
Now, I want to ask you a little different question. Before we get to who the justices are and where they are, or what district they represent, you also have superintending control over the Oklahoma Bar Association, do you not?
That is correct. We have superintending control over the practice of law. We promulgate the rules for the practice of law, the rules for admission. We're also charged with the awesome responsibility of lawyer discipline. So when lawyers are disciplined, those cases do eventually end up in the Supreme Court, and we are the final judges of what discipline, if any, should be imposed upon that particular practitioner.
Well, I think it's impressive for our viewers to recognize that this one court, of which Justice Watt is the Chief Justice, has control not only over the other judges in state court, in state courts here, but also all the lawyers that practice in those courts. So it's truly an enormous responsibility. Let's talk now a little bit about the justices, who they are, how they're selected, how many there are, and I'd ask that a graphic be called up that we've put together that may assist us in looking at that. Can you just run down that for our viewers?
Certainly. We have 9 members on our court, and I think the thing unique about Oklahoma is that we have 9 individual geographic Supreme Court judicial districts, and you must reside in that Supreme Court judicial district at the time of your appointment to the court. That was formulated many, many years ago, and I think wisely so by our previous leaders in the state government. I think it gives a good cross-section of members on our court. It keeps from possibly having too many members of our court from an urban area or too many from a rural area. But the 9 districts, District 1 is represented by Justice Robert Lavender from the Port of Catoosa. District number 6, which is Tulsa, is represented by Justice Daniel Boudreau from Tulsa. Justice Hardy Summers, who is soon to retire, regretfully, from our court, represents the eastern part of the state and is from Muskogee. Justice Hodges represents the southeastern part of our state and is from Durant. Justice Rudolph Hargrave represents District number 8, I believe, and then Justice Opala is in Oklahoma City. He's our Vice Chief Justice, and he represents District 3. Justice James Winchester, the newest member of our court, represents an area of south central Oklahoma. Justice Winchester's from Chickasha. Justice Cogger represents basically the northwestern portion of our state, and I'm blessed to represent 9 counties in southwest Oklahoma for Supreme Court Judicial District number 9.
Well, do the 9 of you get together? How regularly are the 9 of you all in the same room, for instance?
We are together constantly at the Capitol building. We basically meet 2 days a week as a court for different purposes, but we're in the Capitol building every day and, of course, see each other on a daily basis.
Would you characterize that you act 9 independently, or do you act as one? How would you characterize that?
Well, of course, 5 is the magic number on a 9-member court, so you have to have 5 votes to get anything done on our court. But it is a group dynamic, but that dynamic is composed of 9 individual viewpoints in many instances.
You mentioned Justice Summers is about to retire, and that brings up the subject of how does one ascend to the court. Will Justice Summers' vacancy be filled?
All vacancies on the Supreme Court or any appellate court in the state of Oklahoma, and the trial courts for that matter, unless it's during an election cycle, are filled by appointment process. We have had in effect for a number of years the Judicial Nominating Commission, of which you're familiar with, and it's, I think, just the premier way to pick and select a number of names to go to the governor. And the process is basically this. When Justice Summers retires, the application process is now ongoing. Those people who live in his district who are qualified to file their application will do so with the Judicial Nominating Commission. They will conduct interviews. There will be background checks by the OSBI, the Oklahoma Tax Commission. The Judicial Nominating Commission will then conduct oral interviews of the applicants, and once that process has been completed, they will submit 3 names to the governor, and the governor must, under the law, pick one of those 3 individuals to succeed Justice Summers.
Why don't I jump in here and get us to our first break of the show? Justice, we really appreciate you coming by and explaining a lot of these intricate details to us.
It's a joy to be here.
Kent and I'll be right back with Justice Watt.
You know, because people think we have lifetime appointments.
Mick Cornett, Kent Myers back on The Verdict. This week's guest is the Chief Justice of the Oklahoma Supreme Court, the Honorable Joseph M. Watt. Justice, I've heard the term certiorari. Could you explain that and define it for us and how it applies to you?
Well, that's one of those Latin words that we use in the law. The literal translation in the dictionary means to be made aware of. I like to use a simpler definition, a writ of review. And basically, we deal with writs of certiorari to our court on a weekly basis. And basically that is a party that is asking through the appellate process for us to look at a ruling that has come from a lower court.
And original jurisdiction?
Original jurisdiction is a little different avenue to the Supreme Court. It's very limited. We have original jurisdiction over initiative and referendum issues.
So like a state initiative petition?
Correct.
Would be presented to you to certify? Or?
That's correct. Anytime there's a state question on the ballot, it will come to us initially because we have to determine that the correct number of signatures have been legally obtained in order to move the initiative forward. And then we have to do other legal checklists on make sure the ballot title is correct. So we give that original jurisdiction preference every time a state question comes up.
Justice, I know that you told me during our break a rather staggering number that your court processes about 2,000 cases a year. I think the reason it's staggering is if you can show to the viewers what you have in front of you there and explain why you call yourself a reading court.
Well, and we are known as a paper court because we're not like trial courts. We don't take testimony, we don't have juries, we don't deal with anything but paper. And what I have brought here this morning is just a partial record of a record on appeal, as it is called. And basically, when a case comes up from, say, Oklahoma County, for instance, in a civil matter, and that case is appealed to us, we will get the entire record filed with the court clerk in our Capitol building, and that will consist of all of the pleadings from the initial petition by the plaintiff through the jury verdict, if that's the matter.
And transcript of the trial.
Transcript, depositions, all of the paper, and it will sometimes, depending upon the length of the trial, be in one box. I've had cases that have come up in 10 and 12 boxes full of paper.
So when you're not meeting or deliberating with the other justices, you're reading, basically.
That's correct. We meet as a court on Monday and Thursday, and then people always ask us, what do we do Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays? And I tell them, and Saturdays and Sundays, we read.
Yeah. Well, explain just in brief fashion how a typical case would get decided, how it gets assigned, if it does, to a particular justice, and then what process it goes through for the result to be reached.
Every Monday morning we have a docket that starts at 9 o'clock, and we'll go for as long through the day as it takes to get through.
Just with the 9 of you?
Just with the 9 of us. We meet in a conference room. There are no staff people. None of our staffs are with us. It's just the 9 of us. As Chief Justice, I preside over all conferences each Monday and Thursday. But on Mondays, we will typically hear anywhere from 25 to 30 cert cases or original actions each Monday.
What do you mean here?
Basically, for instance, on our next docket, I think we have 28 or 29 cases. Each justice, other than the Chief Justice, will be assigned every 8th case to present to the rest of us. So you have to not only read the 25 to 30 cases, but you may have 3 or 4 cases that you will present to the court. And each justice is called upon in numerical order to present those cases. We'll discuss each of them after they've been presented by the sponsoring justice, and then we will vote as a group in conference immediately on whether or not we will accept that case and grant cert.
And if you do not accept it, is the process over?
Basically, it's over at that point in time. In limited instances, they could seek cert with the United States Supreme Court, but that generally is done after we have taken a case, and that happens very rarely also, but that can happen.
Well, assuming you accept cert, then what happens? How does an opinion get written? How does a decision get made?
Once there are 5 votes to accept cert on a case, then the case is assigned to one of the justices on the court. They are assigned on a rotational basis. People think that we get to pick and choose the cases that we write for the court, and that is not correct. I don't get assignments regularly as chief because of my administrative duties, although I am writing opinions during my term as chief. But generally, if I'm not chief, I will get every 8th case that in which cert is granted. So it may be a divorce appeal, it may be an appeal from the Corporation Commission, the Tax Commission, a complex piece of civil litigation, but that's the way the process works.
We have about a minute 15 left, Ken.
Well, briefly explain what certified question is from the federal court.
We have a relationship with the federal court to the extent that we will receive from them certified questions of fact, and they send those to us when they are unsure of what the Oklahoma law may be with regard to a certain issue before them. That may be stated in one or more questions, and they ask the Supreme Court to answer those and to edify them, if you will, as to what we believe the law in Oklahoma is as to those issues. We don't have to answer a certified federal question, but we generally do answer those when they're submitted to us.
Just a few seconds, maybe half a minute, for you to kind of sum up your thoughts or any message that you'd like to get out to our viewers.
Well, I think Oklahoma should be extremely proud of the judiciary that serves the citizens of this state. We have over 300 trial judges across the state who work very, very hard. We have 12 members of our Court of Civil Appeals, 5 members on our Court of Criminal Appeals, and of course the 9 of us on the Supreme Court. We handle a tremendous amount of business. We affect people's lives on a daily basis, but we have very, very hard-working members on our judiciary, and I'm very proud of all of them. We have historically, however, only been funded with less than 1% of the appropriated funds each legislative session, so we're constantly fighting for dollars to keep the third branch going. But we're in hard economic times now, but we're hopeful that we can see that through and continue to do the good work that I think we're doing.
Well, Justice Watt, thanks for coming on The Verdict.
Thank you.
Joy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Kent and I'll be right back.
Occurs to me, this is an afterthought that I may be dead wrong about, but my sense is that the speed with which a matter is now resolved on appeal, be it by the
We're back to wrap up another edition of The Verdict. Can't refresh my memory. We're talking about the Supreme Court justices who do have to face an election, but not necessarily an opponent and not necessarily a partisan situation.
Yes, it's a nonpartisan election, and it's a retention ballot where they basically the only opponent they have, if any, is their own record. The citizens are asked, should Justice X be retained, yes or no? And if they've been doing a good job, typically the retention is an affirmative. But it is nonpartisan. It isn't Democrat versus Republican. It's just the particular candidate against their own record.
So there's really no campaigning as we would, as you might think of campaigning in a political sense.
Well, it's certainly different.
Yeah,
yes.
certainly.
Yeah, and one other comment I'd like to make is that when I started practicing law many years ago, the backlog at the Oklahoma Supreme Court was just enormous. And years went by, literally years, several years perhaps, would go by awaiting a decision. And a lot of civil litigants can get hurt by that kind of delay, but nevertheless that was there. This court today and in the recent past has really cut down that backlog. As I say, they're putting out to 2,000 cases. They're disposing of 2,000 cases a year with records like this. And only 9 of them to do it. It's a terrific workload, and they do yeoman's work and work that has great impact in Oklahoma.
Well, the time has evaporated here. Let me again thank Chief Justice Joseph M. Watt for coming on The Verdict and remind you of our website, theverdict.tv. Check it out. Send us a note. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict.
You've been watching The Verdict with Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. The Verdict is sponsored in part by the Able Law Firm,